Hey guys, what's going on? It is Ash here coming at you today in Raid Shadow Legends. Today we're going to talk about 10 of the biggest balance changes or the most talked about balance changes inside this recent big champion overhaul from Plarium. So we had the news a few days ago. I've been moving, as I mentioned earlier in a previous video, so I've been a little bit out of touch, but man, I've had a time to kind of digest these balance changes and look at all the community feedback on these balance changes. And, you know, before we jump into my 10 that I kind of want to talk about in this video, I will say this. I don't know, I hate to be so cynical about this, but this does feel a little bit to me like Plarium wanted to nerf a few of the stronger champions in the game, and then they added about 35 or whatever, 25, whatever that it ends up being, other champions that are very, very small or really insignificant changes to these champions. Certainly, I'm not seeing any epic champions really that I look at and say, wow, that they just made another miscreated monster. They just made another Madameceres, which we'll get to, by the way. So I'm not seeing that in these balance changes. I'm not seeing any epics that I'm excited about taking out of the vault, maxing out, and making a video on for you guys. Are you guys seeing that? I mean, I see some decent changes like Snorting Thug and Jotun. By the way, the link to all the balance changes so you guys can read along or take a look at everything, including the advanced quest information and a little bit more about artifact kind of forging and stuff like that. That will be in the description below. I'm imagining that most of you guys have seen most of the balance changes. However, go ahead and feel free to click and read along. I want to talk about 10 balance changes that struck me as either interesting or controversial or I really strongly disagreed with. You know, just anything that I have to say about. So let's go ahead and jump into it, starting with Rotos. Starting out with Rotos, guys. So Rotos is just an incredibly strong champion in this game, one of the strongest champions in this game. Plarium introduced him to the game having to know, they had to know that he was going to be one of the strongest champions inside the game. So all that being said, how are they nerfing this dude? And does it make him dead? Does it make him useless? Is it going to make you guys who own him want to refund all your legendary books and trade this champion in? Okay, so I think that the community reaction on Rotos is maybe a little bit overboard. So I think they nerfed him pretty heavily, but I still think he's actually going to be a solid champion. So, you know, I'm sure a lot of you will disagree with that because, again, community feedback on Rotos are like, you kill this champion, he's useless, you know, trash champion now. I actually don't think that personally, but, you know, I'll let you guys voice your opinions in the comments below. So essentially, what did they do? First of all, they nerfed his damage. You can see on the Vitality Plunder, damage slightly decreased. So the damage multipliers on his A2 slightly decreased. Interesting, right? Because this is an ability that, it's a hard-hitting ability, right? Also, his DPS, or excuse me, his extra turn proc on his A1 is going to be changing from a 30% chance of granting an extra turn to a 25% chance of granting an extra turn. More damage nerf on his A3. His A3 is ignoring 75% of target's defense, as you can see, and now it's only going to be 60% of target's defense ignored. So again, a substantial damage nerf pretty much all around on his A2 and his A3 ability. Also, if you want to block revival, you're going to have full HP from the A2, from Vitality Plunder. So again, you're probably going to, if you have a champion, if you have a reviver on the enemy team, right, and you want to block revive, now with Rotos, you're really going to have to open up with the A2 and he'll have full health. I think we'll see when it goes into game. A lot of people are thinking that you're going to have to use Vitality Plunder 5, 6, 7 times before you're able to charge up to his max health. I mean, I could be totally wrong here. I think that I even watched a bunch of YouTube videos. The YouTubers even Plarium, I feel like everybody's kind of unsure about how many A2s are going to have to be used. Is it just one or is it several before you get him to max HP and able to block revive on the A3? The way I'm reading this is just one time, opening move with the A2 Vitality Plunder, and then just go right into the Fated Destruction to block Revival. That's how I read it. How about you guys? Am I missing something there? Either way, though, I think that he'll still be, I mean, look at his passive, man. I mean, he still has the 50%. Nothing's changed with Spurn Oblivion. What passive makes him one of the better champions in the game as well. And honestly, guys, I really feel like Rotos is going to be good still. However, I agree they went really heavy-handed on the nerfs, so I guess I'm riding the fence a little bit on this one. If I am a Rotos owner right now, I'm certainly not happy about the scale of this nerf, especially compared to other nerfs in this balance change. It felt like Rotos really got hit with the nerf hammer, right? But all that being said, I personally still think he's going to be a champion that I would be excited if I pulled. I don't own Rotos. What about you guys? Any of you guys totally disagree? Again, any of you Rotos owners are like, yeah, you want to own them? Let's trade, man. Let's champion trade. That's how I feel about Rotos. However, there's no doubt about it. The community is upset, generally speaking, about this nerf. So we talked about Rotos, might as well talk about Siffy next, guys. So Siffy, the Lost Bride, widely considered to be the best champion in the game in terms of support. I agree, she's insane. They are nerfing her pretty hard as well, in my opinion. There's no doubt that she needed a nerf, and I do own Siffy, so a little bit hits harder in terms of my own champion collection. But, you know, on the A1, they're changing it from a, on the Whirlwind Romance. That's her insane ability, her A2. They're bringing it to a 10% turn meter from a 15% turn meter, and they're also bringing it up to a 6 turn, so making it a 4 turn cooldown when booked, as opposed to a 3 turn cooldown when booked. To me, this is a very significant nerf on Siffy the Lost Bride. I think that moving this away from a 3-turn cooldown, again, when booked up, is huge. You don't get the increased, one less turn of increased defense, increased speed, block debuffs, and one less turn meter fill, or one more turn without that turn meter fill as well, all because of that 6-turn cooldown instead of a 5-turn cooldown on Siffy the Lost Bride. I still think she's usable. Certainly, this is still a great ability compared to other champions. It just takes her way down in terms of, you know, her being just the most incredible champion in the game, right? It's definitely a big hit with that 1-turn cooldown. You guys know how much I believe in turns, in cooldowns being a huge factor to the overall power index. Now, also on her passive, the heal, instead of being, I think it's 15% right now, it goes down to 10% of their max HP. So here is her passive, guys. Yeah, right now it heals each ally by 15% of their max HP at the start of their turn. Now it's going to be, again, a 10% heal. Not that big of a nerf. I don't think that one is a big one. I think that if they had just nerfed the heal here on the passive, and if they had just taken the turn meter either totally away from this ability but kept it a 3-turn, I would have preferred that, or made the turn meter a 10% and still kept it a 3-turn when booked. I think it would have been still a decent nerf, but this is definitely, again, with that turn changed from 5 to 6, I think that's definitely a pretty hard-hitting nerf to Siffy. You could definitely argue that she needed it, though. So the next one is going to be Madameceres. Madameceres, probably the best epic in the game, certainly in the conversation, certainly one of the best debuffers in the game. Epic, legendary, doesn't matter on the Midnight Ritual ability. We talk a lot about the Midnight Ritual ability here on the channel on a 4-turn cooldown, removes all buffs from all enemies, and then places a decreased attack and a decreased defense for 3 turns, all again on a 4-turn cooldown when booked. This ability is absolutely insane. You see the most Siffy in the arena, although a lot of players probably use her as well for dungeon. Certainly use her for dungeons. So, on the nerf, all it's doing is making this a 2-turn on the Midnight Ritual. So it's, instead of being 3 turns on Midnight Ritual on the decreased attack and decreased defense, it's going to be 2 turns. This does not impact her at all. 0 impact in the arena. There's nothing that changes at all because you just need to get her debuffs down 1 time, get that cleanse, or that buff stripper in the Midnight Ritual. This Midnight Ritual ability still remains the strongest, one of the strongest, if not the strongest kind of debuffer ability inside the entire game, especially for the arena. Now, does this impact Ceres in dungeons? Yes, it does. It's not going to have that consistent. It's only going to be 2 turns, right? Every 4 turns, instead of 3 turns every 4 turns on those debuffs. So Is it that big of a nerf? No, it's kind of a joke, because the reason that Ceres, is so strong is because of Arena, because of Platinum tier Arena, Gold 4 Arena, really anywhere in the arena. She's amazing. She's incredible, and that will not change at all. So it's an insignificant, meaningless nerf for the arena where she is truly OP, and for people who rely on her for dungeons, it's kind of a semi-meaningful nerf that's kind of a nuisance, but that's not where she was so strong anyway. So I really disagree with this nerf personally. I don't think it's a joke of a nerf because it doesn't nerf or fix her where she is broken. It just hurts players who, she's not broken in dungeons, So people in the mid game who are using Ceres in dungeons, you're going to get a little bit of a sting on this, just a little bit. She'll still be okay, but people in the arena will not notice a difference at all. So next up is Astralis. Astralis, oh man, I'll be quick on her. Really cool looking champion. I agree she needed a buff. This was not the answer in my opinion. It's Heart Rot ability. So the Heart Rot ability can no longer, or it cannot be resisted, okay? This is the new buff. So that's her A2, which is really nice because this is her only ability, her bomb. Her bomb is the only ability that needs accuracy in her kit, right? So you no longer have to build her out with any accuracy at all. You can reallocate those stats onto whatever, speed, crit damage, crit rate, attack, whatever, right? The bad news is it doesn't fix a champion who wasn't very good to begin with, especially for legendary champion. She's average, she's meh, and she still is. It's still only one enemy with 2 bombs on Heart Rot. That's it. Okay, it can't be resisted. That's it. It's one enemy. It's not an AoE. It's on a 4-turn cooldown. It's not that exciting of an ability. It's not that exciting of a kit. In all sincerity, the best part about her, in my opinion, is really just her aura. Speed in all battles by 28%. And I don't think this buff is going to be enough to make her viable. Again, getting to that theme that we mentioned at the top of this video, it does really feel like a lot of these buffs were really just kind of left a lot to be desired. Astralis, for me, was one of them. Next up is Duchess, and this one really, really hurt. There's no doubt about it, the Duchess is an incredible champion, coming off another nerf. Last balance changes, I believe, or the one before that. Either way, Duchess is great, especially for clan boss, right? Good for arena still, but really good for clan boss. And boy, did they just really just change things with one small or big nerf, but one small change, one big nerf, right? And it is her Shroud of Souls. The cooldown is now going to be 6 on this, guys. And right now it is 5, but one less cooldown. It really changes the whole utility of this champion, especially in clan boss. In speed comps, place 50% increase attack and block debuffs on all allies for 2 turns. Plays a perfect Veil buff on all allies except this champion for 2 turns. Again, on a 4-turn cooldown when booked, but you move that to a 5-turn cooldown, and it ruins everything that's amazing about Duchess for clan boss. I didn't see this one coming. I didn't think that Duchess needed a nerf at all at this point. I thought that she was on a little bit on the stronger side, like above average, but certainly I didn't really see anybody out there calling for a nerf on Duchess, and she got one. So this is one that I am not in favor of. Alright, let's take a one champion break from being negative and talk about a positive change that I actually like. It's Gerptuck Mossbeard. I actually like the changes that they made to Gerptuck. First of all, we found out really quickly after Gerptuck was, available from the fusion in the game that, holy crap, 5% poisons on all allies for 3 turns does a lot of damage. We also found out that removing all debuffs from an ally when we want the poisons to be on allies makes no sense to have a full cleanse on the A2. It doesn't really synergize. However, with all that said, I'm sure some of you guys are already aware of this, but the most high-end of all high-end kind of dragon endgame speedruns actually runs Gerptuck Mossbeard. So some people out there, the biggest of whales, have found some usage for this champion. Now it looks like potentially, did they go far enough? That remains to be seen. You still might need a buff. I'm not saying this is the be-all, end-all in terms of buffs, but I like the direction they're headed on this champion, who ought to be good because he was a fusion in this game, and we want our fusions to be solid champions, right? So here's the changes. They address both of those issues, essentially. So Druidic Boon, again, removes all the debuffs except for poisons. We want those poisons to stay on our allies, that way they can do more damage through the passive, where they inflict 7.5 more damage for each poison debuff they are under, okay? So Cloud of Spores now places the A3, the other issue that we talked about. It's now 3 of the weak versions of poison, so 2.5% instead of 5% on the poisons on the Cloud of Spores. So again, that helps mitigate the poison damage that he's putting on your allies, cutting that essentially in half. And also, he's not cleansing those poisons from your team. That way they can do extra damage from his passive Symbiotes? I always screw that one up. I apologize. So anyway, doing more damage, taking less damage, not cleansing those poisons. I feel like his kit actually makes a little bit more sense now. Again, will it be enough? Time will tell. Next up is Traxxas, guys. Traxxas is a champion who I already felt was very, very strong. I did a guide on her just a week and a half ago. I'll include that if you guys want to see her in action in the show notes below. She got I don't want to say it's a huge buff. She got a little buff, but I'm just surprised they did that. I think there's way, way, way more deserving champions for a buff than Traxxas. I own Traxxas. I use Traxxas, so I'm not complaining, except for the fact that I am complaining because, honestly, why buff Traxxas? She's great. She's great. Why buff Traxxas? Some of the decisions here, the balance changes, just leave you scratching your head. And again, I own these champions. I'm not calling for a nerf on these champions. Don't kill the messenger here. But like nerfing like Duchess, buffing Traxxas, and not touching, you know, some of the like Tila, like some of the worst, not touching some of the best like Krisk. It just leaves you questioning why, you know? Am I the only one? So what are they changing? The Curse of Writhing, which is her A2, it's now going to guarantee when booked placing that weaken. Previously, it was a 75% chance to land the weaken. And now it's going to have a 75% chance, 100% chance of removing 2 random buffs from the target and then grants an extra turn. This is an insane ability. It deals a ton of damage, then grants you the extra turn to go into her A1, her only other active ability in her kit. And this is just going to make it even that much better because removing the 2 buffs that she does, this 75% chance of removing buffs, that actually happens before she hits them. So for example, against like a Skull Crown, she'll remove that unkillable and kill her all in this one ability. And now it's a 100% chance of happening instead of a 75% chance on both the weaken and the buff removal. It's not the biggest buff in the world from Traxxas, but it's something that I wasn't expecting necessarily. I think when we saw her name, we were like, is it going to be a buff or a nerf? I don't get it, because no one's talking about Traxxas being unbalanced or balanced improperly. Anyway, guys, those are my thoughts on Traxxas. Let's move on to Warlord. This is another huge head scratcher for me, guys, similar to Traxxas, right? Warlord, in my opinion, was already one of the best arena champions in the game. Also, one of just the coolest, best champions to begin with in the game. Orcish Rituals is insane ability. It's on a 6-turn cooldown, can be booked down to 5, attacks all enemies, has a 100% chance when booked to put each target skills on cooldown, and then also has, a 60% chance to fully deplete each target's turn meter. What an insane ability. Now, they're just making it a little bit better. I don't get why. They're making the cooldown now 5 turns. Now, it will not affect him in the arena for the most part. Usually, this long of a cooldown on an ability isn't going to impact the results of a battle necessarily. However, with that said, it's weird, man. Like, why buff Warlord when he's already a great champion? What stats are they looking at that make them think that Warlord is the dude who needs a buff? With all the crappy legendary champions out there. Now it's going to be a 5-turn, can be booked down to a 4-turn now after this buff. Head scratcher, right? So next up is Tormund, again with a balance change to Wintry Wind, his passive, man. They can't decide what they want on this one. So right now it's a 15% chance of placing a freeze debuff on an enemy each time they receive a buff or have their turn meter filled. Now, this 15% chance applies for each effect individually in cases where an enemy receives multiple of these effects at the same time. So now they're going to bump that up to a 20% chance of placing a freeze debuff. Now the 20% chance applies up to 2 times. Let's go ahead and read the text here. So now it's being buffed up from 15% chance of placing a freeze to a 20% chance of placing a freeze. So it's kind of a rework here. It's not a buff or a nerf, because instead of having every single one of those buffs trigger that or proc that passive effect, now it's going to be up to 2 per enemy, once for buffs and once for turn meter. This is actually going to be an indirect buff to Siffy, because she previously, every single one of her buffs would trigger this ability, for example, right? So champions like Siffy, it's actually going to be a nerf to Tormund. For other champions, it's going to be a buff because of 20% chance on the turn meter will help Tormund. So it's kind of an interesting one again on Tormund. I guess, again, it's not that I have a problem with this one. I actually don't have a problem with it. I think it's kind of interesting this way. It keeps him in check a little bit from just chain freezing like a maniac every time there's a bunch of buffs on the field. However, at the same time, he does get that 20% bump up as well, which is significant in my opinion. I guess the question though is why, I guess, you know, were people, I felt like they kind of had Tormund right. So was this necessary? Was this needed? I guess I'll leave that to you guys to answer, but for me, I think that probably not necessary, probably not needed, but it's not the end of the world. So last but not least, it's the only buff in these balance changes which I really feel is meaningful for a champion who's one of the worst in the game. One of the worst legendaries is Candrafon right now. There's going to be a lot of changes. Let's go over his kit the way it is right now, and let's go over all the changes. So on the A1, place an extra hit if the target is under increased attack. The buff here is going to be an extra hit if the target is under any buffs. Doesn't have to be just increased attack, okay? On the A2, attacks all enemies, grants an extra turn, and resets the cooldown of On the Hunt skill if this attack kills an enemy on a 3 turn. And then On the Hunt places a perfect veil and an increased attack buff on this champion for 2 turns. His passive is damage increased by 40% while attacking under a veil or perfect veil buff. So let's go over all the changes. There's a lot of them, so I'm going to cover myself up here. All right. So as we talked about, let's start with the A1, which is Punish Hubris. So Punish Hubris attacks one enemy, plays an extra hit if the target is under any buff, okay? That's good. On the Butcher's Glee ability here, actually that one's not being changed, I apologize. On the A3, On the Hunt. So On the Hunt here, at the very bottom, places a perfect veil buff, increased attack buff, which is what it is right now, and then an increased speed buff 30%, increased crit damage buff 30% on this champion for 2 turns. That's a really significant buff to the On the Hunt ability. Again, On the Hunt right now does not have the crit damage, does not have the speed on it, okay? And then on the From the Shadows passive, again, if we look at it right now, it's just damage increases, by 40% while attacking under a veil or a perfect veil. It's going to be changed to a big spiel here, right? Damage increased by 40% while attacking under veil, which is right now. Receives 40% less damage while under veil or perfect veil buffs. Also boosts turn meter by 15% each time this champion receives damage under a veil or perfect veil. Does not work if this champion is the only ally alive on the team. Also adds a new active effect. Places a perfect veil buff on this champion for 1 turn each time an enemy's turn meter is filled. This buff cannot be removed. That is huge, that active effect, because that's going to allow him to veil himself all the time with his passive, making him a real monster potentially. Will this be enough to take this champion from D tier to S tier? That remains to be seen, but certainly should vault up a few kind of power index categories, rankings, if you will, on Candrafon. So I'm very pleased with this buff. I just would have liked to see more buffs like this. actually changing the game in terms of balance. I don't feel like this is going to change anything incredibly dramatically inside the game. I do think this is in preparation for the Doom Tower, which will be the most difficult area inside the entire game according to Plarium. So we'll see if this rebalancing really means much different in terms of what the Doom Tower will look like when we get that update in just a week or two. Here is what it seems, or when it seems it will be coming. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Look forward to reading your comments on these balance changes in the description, or in the comments below, excuse me. Thank you so much for watching until the end. I appreciate it, and as always, take care, guys.